The enmity.
No, it says the ordinance of handwriting that were against us were nailed to the cross. Yeah.
I'm thinking of the one in Ephesians. I think you're thinking of the one in Colossians.
Yeah.
Colossians 2:8, I believe, but I'm not sure.
Oh well.
That was definitely like the crime he was being charged with.
It's not Colossians 2:8.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I thought this verse very interesting. 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 13.
Is Michelle okay?
Michelle?
Is she alright?
Michelle, are you okay?
Yeah.
You in pain?
I was sitting there and I was reading, yeah, I'm alright. Thank you.
1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 13. I charge you in the presence of Elohim, who gives life to all things, and of Yahusha HaMashiach, who testified the good confession before Pontius Pilate, that you keep the commandment without stain or reproach until the appearing of our Master, Yahusha HaMashiach, which he will bring about at the proper time. He who is the blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and the Master of masters, who alone possesses immortality and dwells in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see. To him be honor and eternal dominion. I mean, this verse is kind of interesting to me because in verse 15, it says, it's talking about the appearing of Yahusha. It says, which he will bring about at the proper time. When I read that, I'm thinking, well, now that's talking about the Father, because the Father will bring that about. And then it says, he who is blessed and only sovereign. Now I'm thinking that's the Father still. But then it says, the King of kings and the Master of masters. That I'm thinking, oh, that's Yahusha. Okay? But then in verse 16, I'm thinking undoubtedly it's the Father. Because it says, he dwells in an unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see. I'm pretty sure that's talking about the Father.
Sounds like it.
So, very interesting verse to me. It's talking about being the King of kings and the Master of masters. We'll just looking at pictures of Yahusha reigning as king, but here it looks to me as though Yahuwah is actually the King of kings. Because no man has seen him. No one can dwell in his unapproachable light. Oh, the more I was looking at these verses, the more I began to see some interchangeableness with the Father and with the Son and with these titles of king and sovereign and master. I kind of began to see some interchangeableness, just like I did with unleavened bread and Passover. There's an interchangeableness between those words. Even in the Tanakh, in the Torah, in the New Testament, there's an interchangeableness with those words, Passover and unleavened bread. I began to see the same thing with the Father and with the Son. They're sovereign, they're king, they're Elohim. It almost seems like these titles can refer to both of them. So, yeah, good luck discerning who's who.
Good luck. Good luck with that.
But here we see him being king and reigning. Go ahead and go to Revelation chapter 17, verse 14. Now, a lot of times when we're reading, sometimes I think maybe something's lost in translation a little bit. Maybe the way they wrote it in the original and the way they translated it, and maybe a little smudge here, smudge there, maybe on purpose, maybe not, maybe. That's why it becomes so hard to discern the distinction sometimes. Or maybe they wrote in such a way that people knew at that time what they were talking about. And maybe we're so far removed from their idioms and ideas that I'm not really sure sometimes what they're saying. Revelation chapter 17 verse 14 says, "These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Master of masters, Melech of melechs, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples of multitudes and nations and tongues." And I'll just stop there, verse 14. It's talking about the Lamb. And talk about the Lamb will overcome. And it says that the Lamb is the Master of masters, Sovereign of sovereigns, and that he is the King of kings. Revelation chapter 19, verse 16. Yahusha gets a tattoo. I'm just kidding. I don't know if it's a tattoo or not. All I can tell you is what it says.
It says, "Thou shalt not make markings on your flesh." No. That's horrible.
Revelation chapter 19, verse 11. "I saw the heavens open, and behold, a white horse. He who sat upon it is called Faithful and True. In righteousness he judges and wages war." This is kind of a similar to what is in Daniel chapter 7, talking about him sitting upon a white horse. "And his eyes are a flame of fire, and upon his head are many diadems, and it has a name written upon him which no one knows except himself. He's clothed with the robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of Elohim. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white linen, were following him on white horses. And from his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that he might smite the nations. And he will rule them with the rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of Elohim El Shaddai. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, the King of Kings and the Sovereign of Sovereigns, the Master of Masters."
Might not be a tattoo. Might just be on his pants.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It just says on his thigh.
Yeah.
You can run with that however you want.
It is a birthmark.
No, it's an actual inscription, not a birthmark.
Well,
It says he has a name written, the King of Kings and the Master of Masters. So we definitely get the picture that Yahusha's king, and that he is reigning. So that makes it very interesting when you think of Yahusha as king and you begin to read a lot of verses in the Old Testament, because a lot of those verses I think are talking about the Father as being king.
right.
But we know for sure, we've read verses in the Old Testament and New Testament confirming Yahusha is king. So the Father bestows this upon him, this role. Look at some verses that just talk about Yahusha being exalted. Let's go to Psalm chapter 45. Psalm chapter 45, verse 10. And we were here earlier, we read verse 6 and 7. Verse 10, I believe it's still speaking about Yahusha. It says, "Listen, O daughter, give attention and incline your ear. Forget your people in your father's house." I actually think that it's talking to the bride here. I believe that it's talking to the bride of Yahusha. It's saying, forget those lies you inherited. Forget it. In verse 11 it says, "Then the king will desire your beauty." So if you forget your people in your father's house, if you forget those lies and traditions, and you begin to follow His ways, then He'll desire your beauty. Then He will desire your beauty. Because He is your Master. Bow down to Him. That word there is actually the Hebrew word shakah for worship. Worship Him because He is your Master. Worship Him. If you read this in context, the whole chapter, I believe this whole chapter is about Yahusha. I think it's about His return when He comes with a sword in the first few verses. And then you see Yahuwah giving the Son in verse 6 and 7 the throne, telling Him the throne is forever, and He anoints Him with the oil of joy. And then it looks like a marriage of the Lamb and the bride taking place. Very interesting chapter. So it just shows Yahusha being exalted. I believe that this is actually a picture of worshiping Yahusha here. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 53, verse 12. We'll look at the suffering servant. Even this suffering servant, he gets exalted. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 12. This is obviously about the Messiah carrying our sins, taking our sins, being crushed with our iniquities, pierced for our transgressions. The iniquity of us all fell upon Him. In verse 12 it says, therefore I will allot Him a portion with the great, and He will divide the booty. Oh yeah, He will divide the booty with the strong, because He poured out Himself to death. So here we see that He's being exalted. He's being allotted a portion with the great, able to divide the booty with the strong. So even the suffering servant has a picture of being exalted after his sufferings because he was obedient even unto death. Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. Picture of Yahusha being exalted. This is one of the most interesting chapters in the Bible.
Yeah, it is.
A vision that Daniel has of the Father and of the Son. In verse 9, it's a vision of the Father. Verse 9 says, I kept looking until thrones, notice plural, thrones were set up. And the Ancient of Days, I believe this is the Father, the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames, and its wheels were a burning fire. How about that? A throne with wheels. Was this a wheelchair?
Chariots of fire.
A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him. Myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, the books were open. That could be scary. The court sat, the books were open. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted them for an appointed period of time. Verse 13, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, the clouds of heaven, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man coming. How many times in the New Testament do we see the Son of Man coming with the clouds, right? Behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days. I believe this is a picture of Yahusha coming before Yahuwah. And he was presented before him, presented to Yahuwah. And to Yahusha was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all the peoples and nations and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. So here we see Yahusha being exalted. He's given the glory. He's given the kingdom. He's given dominion. It says that people might serve him. That word serve is very interesting. It's only of Aramaic origin from what I was reading. And it could mean serve, minister, or worship. And when I looked it up in Brown, Drivers, and Briggs lexicon, it had only 2 references, and those 2 references were the worship of deity. It's an Aramaic word.
Halach.
Yeah, like 63.99 or something like that.
Yep.
And it's only used in the book of Daniel, that word. And Daniel was writing things in what, Aramaic, I guess, coming out of Babylon, or?
Yeah, if I was to show you the writing of Aramaic, and you wouldn't be able to distinguish it from the Hebrew by looking at the letters. They're the same letters.
Well, the book of Daniel is the only place that word shows up.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting word. Could mean to serve, to minister, to worship. Oh, if it is to worship, then here we have another picture of worshiping Yahusha. So here we see Yahusha being exalted with dominion, with glory, an eternal kingdom that people would serve and worship him. Let's go to Philippians chapter 2, verse 9. Philippians 2:9. Therefore also Elohim highly exalted him, talking about Yahusha. Yahuwah highly exalted Yahusha and bestowed on Yahusha the name which is above every name, that at the name of Yahusha every knee should bow, those who are in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and that every tongue would confess that Yahusha HaMashiach is Master, to the glory of Yahuwah. Here I see an interesting connection, and it's a pretty common theme in the New Testament, actually. When you're giving glory, when you're giving worship, when you're giving praise to Yahusha, you're giving it to the Father. The Father is receiving it. It's a connection there. And Mary, he's the way to the Father. No man comes to the Father but through Yahusha. Revelations chapter 5. This is a picture in heaven of Yahusha being exalted. Right along with the Father, actually. And we'll just read verse 13. In verse 13 it says, every created thing which is in heaven, on the earth, and under the earth, and on the sea, and all things on them, I heard them saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory, dominion, forever and ever. So this to me is a picture of the Father sitting on the throne, the Son being next to the Father, and them both being worshipped. That's the picture I get from that. Be blessing and honor and glory and dominion forever and ever. But Yahuwah, or Yahusha, is definitely, he's being exalted here. Some more verses dealing with Yahusha's dominion or his place. Some of these we already read. We just read Daniel chapter 7, where Yahuwah was seated on the throne. Yahuwah presented Yahusha. The Father presented the Son with glory, dominion, and everlasting kingdom. Isaiah chapter 9, that's a popular little reference there. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 says, a child will be born to us, a son will be given. Government will rest on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty Elohim, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There'll be no end to the increase of his government or peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it, to uphold with justice and righteousness from then and forevermore. The zeal of Yahuwah, the zeal of Yahuwah Sabaoth will accomplish this. The only word there that I actually kind of struggle a little bit with is Eternal Father. That's an interesting title to be giving to Yahusha. It's almost like their titles become intertwined, interchangeable. It's kind of difficult to discern. I mean, when you think of Eternal Father, do you think of the Son or the Father? I think of the Father. You know, it's a little difficult sometimes to discern these titles. There's so many of them. But here we see there's no end to the increase of Yahusha's government or peace. And then he sits upon the throne of Dawood, the throne of David. So, his place, his dominion.
And he shall be called Wonderful. Palah. It's the opposite letters of Aleph. If you take the word for Aleph and you spell it backwards,
Oh, okay.
wonderful. It also means a miracle. He shall be called. It's kind of the same thing that he's talking about.
Right.
The interchangeability. He shall be called the Aleph in reverse.
Wow. Mirror.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. If I could only read all this stuff in Hebrew, it'd probably open up a whole other realm of studying. I'm talking about Yahusha's dominion. He had dominion over nature. We don't have to go there and read it, but in the Gospels, in Mark chapter 1, verse 27, in John chapter 3, verse 35, he has power over the wind and the sea. He has power. And in Luke chapter 6, verse 5, Yahusha says that he is master of Shabbat. That's power, people.
Luke chapter what?
He is the master. Luke chapter 6, verse 5. Yahusha declares that he is the sovereign of Shabbat. If you be the sovereign of it, I think you be the creator of it. He is the master of it. I could be wrong. But he is the master of Shabbat. Romans chapter 14 and 9. I'll go ahead and go there. Romans chapter 14 and verse 9. Paul writes some really interesting things on this subject matter. For to this end Messiah died and lived again, that he might be master both of the dead and of the living. So here we see that his dominion is over the dead, and his dominion is over the living. And he died that he might have that dominion, master of the living and dead. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6. Yet for us there is but one Elohim, the Father, from whom are all things, and we exist for him. And one Master, Yahusha HaMashiach, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. So here Paul says there's one Elohim, that's the Father, and there's one Master, that's Yahusha. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This verse I thought intriguing myself. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting in verse 20. But now Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep, right? First fruit. He is the first fruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Verse 21, since by a man came death, by a man also came the resurrection from the dead. Talk about Yahusha. For as in Adam all die, so also in Messiah all shall be made alive. But to each in his own order. Messiah, the first fruits. After that, those who are Messiahs at his coming. what I get from that is when he comes, when he returns, we will raise up just like he did from the dead to be his fruits.
And not before that.
Mm-hmm.
That's important thing. I mean, that's also important when something else in Acts chapter 2, when you were looking at Acts chapter 2 before, they were talking about David. It said, David is not ascended into the heavens, but he saith unto himself that Yahusha saith.
In other words, David is still in the grave.
No, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's only one person who's ascended up into the heavens at this point, right?
Yeah.
Well, no. There's Enoch and Moses too, right?
There's a weird little
Yeah.
resurrection that takes place when Yahusha's crucified.
Yeah. Some people come up, but
Yeah,
but they
and
died
because
again.
of that, I think a false doctrine started that the resurrection had occurred.
oh,
That Paul actually deals with a couple people.
oh,
That to me, that's weird.
yeah.
What was that?
I think that was just latent power. It was just so much power that it kind of bled
Maybe
over.
it just, like when a
Yeah.
lightning storm strikes over there and we all feel it. I don't know what happened there, but
It's weird.
I would say that Yahusha is the firstborn from the dead. He is the first fruits, and I would say that the rest of us gotta wait.
Gotta wait.
Had there been maybe a couple special circumstances or cases where he has resurrected people, that's his business. He can do whatever he wants. If he actually resurrected a couple people, if the death of Messiah, if that little occurrence that happened, maybe they died again. Maybe they had to go back to the grave. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But
Yeah.
as far as we're concerned, I would say that we are going to have to wait till he returns before we are
It
resurrected.
won't be much of a wait. You'll be asleep.
Yeah, I don't think that we'll notice the time. In verse 24 it says, so after those who are Messiahs at his coming, talk about being resurrected, verse 24, then comes the end. That's interesting. After the resurrection, then comes the end. When he delivers up the kingdom to Elohim and fathers. This is talking about Yahusha delivering up the kingdom to the Father,
Yeah.
who is Elohim. When he has abolished all rule and all authority and all power. So once he's abolished all rule, all authority, all power, everything is subjected to him, he's going to turn it over to the Father. In verse 25 it says, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death, for he has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when he says all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is accepted. It is evident that he is accepted who put all things in subjection to him. And when all things are subjected to him, when the Son himself also will be subjected to the one who subjected all things to him, that Yahuwah may be all in all. That's the second time we've seen Paul say that Yahuwah may be all in all.
And that kind of goes with saying, what he's basically saying there is he's saying, all things are going to be put under his feet because the Father put all the things under his feet. Obviously, the Father's not going to be put underneath his feet.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Once everything is actually in subjection to Yahusha is going to turn around, subject himself to the Father, and everything under him will be subjected to the Father. Very interesting verse to me.
Yeah.
And Paul sums it up by saying, in order that the Father may be all in all. Well, Yahusha is putting all things in subjection to himself, and then he will subject himself to Yahuwah, so that Yahuwah may be all in all. Talking about Yahusha's dominion, talking about his place. Colossians chapter 1, verse 18. He's the firstborn from the dead, and he's come to have first place in everything. Colossians chapter 1, verse 13, he delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption for the forgiveness of sins. He's the image of the invisible Elohim and the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, or authorities. All things have been created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the congregation, the head of the body, the congregation. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself might come to have first place in everything. So he's the firstborn from the dead, and he has the first place in everything. Hebrews chapter 1 verse 4. Having become as much better than the angels, he's inherited a much more excellent name than they. So his name is even more excellent than the angels. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 3. For he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, but just as much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. So he's counted as more glory than Moses. Let's take a quick peek at the judgment seat. I'm almost done here. A quick seat at the judgment seat of Messiah. A quick peek, a quick look at the judgment seat of Messiah. Go to Psalm chapter 110 again. Looking at the judgment seat of Messiah. Psalm 110, verse 4. The Lord Yahuwah has sworn and will not change his mind. Thou art a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. The Master is at thy right hand. He will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. He will judge among the nations. So here we see it talking about Yahusha, in that he will actually be judging among the nations. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, it tells us that we all must appear before the judgment seat of the Messiah. So the Messiah will be in charge of the judgment seat and judging people. We're just going to look at 2 more verses. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 17, what does it say? Revelation 1:17.
And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, Fear not, I am the Aleph and the Tav, the first and the last.
I am the first and the last. The Aleph and the Tav, right?
Mm-hmm.
He says, and the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. I have the keys of death and of Hades. So, this is talking about Yahusha. Yahusha, he's speaking of himself. He says that he has the keys of death and Hades. He says he's alive forevermore. He was dead, and now he's alive. He's the living one, and it says that he's the first and the last.
Mm-hmm.
Go to Isaiah chapter 44, verse 6.
I knew you were going to go there.
To me, this is a beautiful connection.
I'm sorry, Isaiah 44?
Isaiah chapter 44, verse 6. Thus says Yahuwah, the King of Israel. So here, to me, stop right there. It looks like the Father, Yah, is the King of Israel. Thus says Yahuwah, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer. Yahuwah said, whoa. So now it looks like it's the Father being the King, and Yahuwah, or
The same person.
Yahusha, is the Redeemer, and he is also Yahuwah Sebaot.
You know what this could mean, though? This could mean, thus say Yahuwah, the King of Israel, and Israel's Redeemer, Yahuwah, the Lord of Hosts. Which is kind of just a way of just repeating the same thing.
Yeah, that could actually be a
Yeah.
possibility. The way mine words it, it makes it look like
That's what I'm seeing in the Hebrew.
it's the Father and his Redeemer. But I see what you're saying, because his might not actually belong in there.
Might refer to Israel.
Right.
Because they oftentimes refer to Israel
Yeah.
as him.
That's
or
a
he.
problem that you get without
What version do you have?
reading it in Hebrew.
I'm just looking at the King James.
Alpha what?
Huh?
What alpha what?
Blue letter Bible with the Hebrew text underneath it.
Ah.
Okay, so Isaiah 44:6, it says, Thus says Yahuwah, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, Yahuwah Sabaoth, I am the first and I am the last, and there is no Elohim beside me. So, despite of how it reads, whether it says, I am his, the King and his Redeemer, both of them say this, or if it's the King and the King is the Redeemer and he says this, either way he says, I am the first and I am the last, and there's no Elohim beside me.
Yeah.
Something that Yahusha obviously was making a reference of himself. In Revelation, Yahusha says that he's what?
The first and the last.
He
Sorry,
says-
sorry to derail you.
He is the first, oh, it's no big deal. He is the first and the last, and there is no Elohim beside him. So, the point here is simply that I personally think that Yahuwah is the Father, and that he's the head over all of it. I think that he